Great events create great brands, and it takes a village to put on an event that engages, excites, and connects audiences to your brand. And we're that village. I'm Alyssa.
I'm Paulina.
And I'm Rachel.
And you're listening to Great Events, the podcast for all people interested in events and marketing.
Hello, everyone. What is going on in the wide world of events? I'm Rachel.
I'm Alyssa.
And I'm Paulina.
And today you're going to get to hear from all your Great Events hosts today. We have a very fun episode for you guys today. The three of us haven't just been together in a really long time, pretty much all season. I mean, we've kind of divided and conquered for most of it with the busyness of the return to in-person. But with that said, today we are talking about our return to office and our employee engagement events that have kind of surrounded Cvent as a company coming back to the return of office. We're going to talk about that and much more regarding trends and how events are kind of following suit to people returning to office in general. So yeah, I'm just going to dive right in and we're going to, give some of our perspectives on all the goodness. So, depending on where you guys work, I don't know about other companies, but our leadership team had a very lengthy debate on what the return to office looks like and what was best for us. And I think in general, I don't know if we're late to the game here. I know a lot of people have returned to office this year and they've done it in a number of various different ways, depending on the companies, like not coming back to office, going completely hybrid, going completely remote, and giving up their office space. So there's just a lot of trends around that. And I read an interesting stat the other day that was like basically 60 or 70% of remote and hybrid Americans, this is just for North America, intended to return to office in some capacity. And then of that 70%, only about 10% of those people were going to come back all 5 days that week. So for us at Cvent, we've kind of developed like a little bit of a hybrid program where we're coming in 1 to 2 days a week, 6 to 8 days per month, as kind of a pilot program to returning to office. So we all have a little bit of a unique perspective. Just for our listeners, I'm fully remote, in Denver, and, Paulina is at our HQ office, and then Alyssa is back at our HQ office, but used to be in a regional office / remote. So we all have kind of different perspectives. So anyway, different viewpoints. What are your guys' thoughts on returning? Let's just have an open dialogue here.
I'm happy to kind of kick it off. I come from the mindset where I've just been craving the in-office engagement experience, being with the team. I think it comes with sort of the nature of the career, right? Events, like you want to be face-to-face. You want to have those creative opportunities to exchange ideas, to just sort of turn around in your chair and ask someone a question. To me, that's all second nature. And I've, over the last few years, have been craving that. So the return to office has been a really anticipated opportunity for myself. And I think my team shares that similar sentiment. I mean, half of the team is new. And so they haven't really had a chance to get to know us on that in-person kind of level. And so there's been a lot of excitement around it. And we'll get into this, in a little bit, but I think something that's unique for our team is that we've been very integrated in the return to office planning and execution, right? Rachel's, very much part of the strategy, and my team has been very much in partnership with HR and other departments in terms of implementing it and what that experience looks like. Is it a one-day event? Is it a multi-week program? How does it extend beyond the walls of HQ? And so that's been something that's been really interesting to sort of experience and execute at the same time.
Yeah, and I can actually provide a counter to Paulina's enthusiasm for being back in the office. I've had, I don't want to say a significant amount of anxiety about going back, but I, like Rachel had called out in the beginning of the conversation, I was a remote employee, lived 3 years approximately out of state, was going to a different regional office every once in a while. But for the most part, had been pretty much a virtual, plugged into the Zoom conversation for the last, pre-pandemic times. So I had not only pandemic hurdle to get over, but also having moved back. I also moved job functions in that time frame. So I'm seated in a different department, and none of my team members actually are where I can turn my chair and talk to them, right? So I'm having to kind of like forge these new relationships with people that aren't necessarily part of my day-to-day. So I would say, and I think, when did we start going back, guys? Middle of September? Is that right? So it's been like about a month of this, like going in and trying to get used to it, the pilot program, if you will. And I feel like I'm just turning the corner on realizing, okay, there's value to the relationships that I do have in the office that might not be just on my team, but that are part of this bigger kind of Cvent perspective. And part of that, and I'm just going to like kind of tee this up and then we can go deeper on kind of the event strategy, is some of the events that Paulina and Rachel and the team produce. They are very intentional about kind of bringing people together to create relationships when they aren't necessarily on the same team, right? So one that is a huge, huge big deal and was one of my favorite things that happened when I was at our headquarter office the first time before I moved away was our Cvent Halloween. I'll call it the bonanza, but it really is a big deal. And this team really does a major execution and strategy for how this impacts our retention and our recruitment efforts for Cvent.
Wow. So we have a lot of major themes to touch on here. Let's start with like the pre-event strategy stuff. I think, for me, I'll just explain to our listeners, I'm sure at other companies, there's tons of committees and cross-functional groups that get together to make decisions. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the Return to Office Global Committee across all of our global offices, including India and beyond. And being a remote employee, I have alongside our remote employee committee, which is we call our regional office council or ROC. Being part of that has kind of, as a new remote employee, but also with the lens on being in person before pre-pandemic at HQ for, almost 10 years, I have that lens, but I also have the remote lens now. So being part of that committee was interesting because obviously everybody has different viewpoints on how many days we should go back, what engagement actually means, because engagement is a huge buzzword that can mean like 18 different things, right? So defining what engagement means for employees, because you have to survey your employees and what do people actually want? And there was a lot of that. There were a lot of discussions prior to going back. And I think there was twofold, like people love the flexibility of being working from home, but they also miss the in-person stuff like Paulina and you just mentioned. Like I know as a remote employee, I feel severe FOMO that my team gets to see each other a couple days a week and I get to see them on Zoom, but that just means I have to be even more plugged in and engaged, reaching out to them to meet and being a part of that without getting kind of like, I don't know, left behind isn't the right word, but there's certain engagement that happens at these offices. So part of the discussion was like, yes, it's amazing that we're going back in person. And that engagement is part of the reason why you're in an office, and part of the benefits of being in an office include things like doing lunches or doing engagement events that we can chat about in a second. But like, then how do you bring your remote people in to feel that same engagement level? It's really tough. And so there were many, many meetings where we went back and forth on how do we engage remote? How do we engage in person? Looking at the in-person first and then saying, what of these different activities could also lend itself to the remote population? And, I don't think we're perfect, but I think we did a pretty decent job returning to office. Even though I wasn't there, I could feel the excitement on site. I could feel people like meeting each other for the first time in like 2 years, and especially people that were hired during the pandemic. It's just, you have to think about that. And I think, Paulina, you touched on this, but like the partnership between operations, HR, any of the committees that are, the ROC committee, like I mentioned, getting all those people and having events tied into the mix is important. So, I'd recommend to our listeners, if you're not part of those discussions, be part of them, because, you don't want a pop-up event to come to you and last minute, you probably want to be part of the strategy or discuss with HR who handles it if it's an HR engagement versus a full scale events program.
Yeah. And I would just say before, Paulina, because obviously you have a lot of ownership in this, is like Cvent has really treated Return to Office as an event. It's like a very long campaign type event. But it's so much so that it's like kind of called Return to Office. Like we have an acronym internal, it's RTO, like it's very much has an event strategy, not just an engagement strategy. Those two things go hand in hand when you're doing events. But a lot of other departments don't necessarily see it that way. And I think activating the events team is critical to the success that we're at least seeing on our end. So I just wanted to call that out, that we're really treating this not just moment in time, but this kind of extended campaign as an event in of itself. And then Paulina's team is really the ones presenting and delivering that engagement strategy on behalf of the org.
Yeah. And I think, while there's been this amazing return to office strategy, I think it isn't necessarily second nature, or we wouldn't have necessarily assumed that the meetings and events team would have taken on such a large role. I think it's been amazing to see the team flex these new muscles, right? Or perhaps the same muscles that we would for a large user conference, and it's being activated for an internal employee experience, right? We're working, Rachel mentioned operations, HR. I mean, we're thinking about people who have never been to the office before, and what does that logistically look like, right? You have to pull up to the front of the office, get your parking card. From there, how do you get from the garage to like your particular tower, right? These are the level of logistics that the team actually was involved in. And I think it just shows the sort of versatility of transferable skills that planners have, that meetings professionals have, that we're able to step in and help support a really large and important strategy, fundamentally, impacting business in a new way. And I thought, I think our team did a phenomenal job. We're still, the strategy that we're leveraging is a multi-week program, right? I think it's, what is it, Rach, like 6-7 weeks of engagement?
7 or 8 weeks of programming each day or every week, basically doing 1 to 2 things per day, which I guess we could talk about with the group. I mean, they're not these monumental events, but they are impactful in terms of engaging with your employees. So some examples would be like our ice cream social that we had, where you bring everybody into the kitchen and network with senior management. We have coffee and donuts where you again, network together in the morning and have talking points and things like that. We had, when we first returned, there was a big happy hour in the office and engaging all the floors to bring everybody kind of together for lunches. A lot of it, you're seeing a theme around food here. There's a lot of food brings people together type things, but I think that there's a, in our opinion, we were brainstorming things. It was one, our goal was to get employees talking to each other in different departments, but then also networking with some senior leadership that they may not get FaceTime with on a Zoom meeting, right? So, and Paulina and boots on the ground help execute all of that. And we're still kind of in the middle of it, right, Paulina?
Yeah. It has been like she's mentioned, it's been an activation every week, sometimes twice a week. And in addition to sort of these food and beverage based connection experiences, we've also expanded upon existing frameworked events that were already on our roadmap, right? So we had a global town hall, we had a mid-year promotion celebration. So, it was kind of expanding on that footprint and extending that engagement, at HQ and globally and throughout our remote offices. We had hackathon. Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of existing programs that were kind of already in place and seemed to serve similar goals for some of the additional engagement opportunities. I think the most exciting one, the one that Alyssa was alluding to earlier, is our upcoming Halloween. And I wish we could attach a piece of collateral to this episode so that you could see the level of strategy, creativity, investment that our team and the employees have around this holiday. It just really exudes that fun, collegial, enthusiastic, just high energy culture that is so, synonymous with Cvent. I think I'm just really excited to see it be activated, but then we're looking at it differently this year. I have to throw her name out here because she is really the queen of the engagement experience. But Sam Ephthymitis, who's been on the podcast previously, is really spearheading this. And it's not just Halloween at HQ. It's not just Halloween at remote offices. That we have completely incorporated the entire remote experience to be a part of this really special day in Cvent culture, where, costume contests are not just exclusive to on-site. There are remote employees, regional offices. There are cash prizes. There are fun, gifts that are allocated. So it's a full hybrid event, if you will, right? She has been really thinking about ensuring that the experience is optimized for everyone, regardless of where they sit in the org.
It's exciting. I think we're hopefully, knock on wood, we're doing a good job engaging all the different employees that partake in it and feel like they're connected to the overall contest. I mean, we could do literally a whole episode on just how Cvent runs Halloween. We've had some very funny social media pictures posted over the years, if you are a follower of Cvent on Instagram or anything. But it's a funny day because everybody just goes about meetings like normal. We also have interviews that come in, and we've been known to see Harry Potter's and Winnie the Pooh's interviewing people, which is hilarious because imagine being a candidate coming into the office looking for for a job. Yeah. And you're being interviewed by, I don't know, Glenda the Good Witch. It's hilarious. But I think it's not just like probably what the listeners think is just like, oh, people dress up and it's a fun day. It's just so much more integrated than that. There's like a literal run of show for the day. There are kids coming in, there's contests. Now we have, decorating different areas of the office contests. We have pumpkin carving for, remote people. There's contests for pets and kids and home offices. Like we're just really incorporating like more integration for not just like in the headquarters office. We're looking at everybody and saying, everybody participate in this. To engage with the culture that is, a more fun culture.
I was jotting down like a couple of things while you guys were talking, because it's like, to me, I'm like trying to notice like the changes in what's gone on within the planning industry and kind of the event production industry. And the one thing that you were calling out, Paulina, a little bit earlier was kind of this like hyper collaborative environment where people lean onto the meetings and events department, because you guys are experts, not just in events per se. You're experts in experiences and the engagement that comes along from those experiences. And so to me, I know we talked a lot about kind of in the the early stages of the pandemic and even like kind of an outcome of that, how marketing and meetings and events are working so closely together because they're achieving all these commercial objectives and you're getting more leads and you're just getting more engagement and all that stuff's so good for the marketing department. All of that's great. That's externally focused. There's also these internal objectives that your HR department needs to achieve as well that are kind of eerily similar to your customer focused objectives, like getting new people, recruitment efforts, or trying to keep the people that you have, the retention efforts, but for the employees. And so I think it's interesting and yet no surprise to me that our meetings and events team is so heavily involved and tactically utilized in that way. I know a lot of organizations probably have their HR team doing these things, but I think there is a critical piece of these kind of experience makers. I like to put that in quotes because I think that they really are kind of champions for that cause. And you can hear it through what Rachel just described. Like our Halloween is out of control, amazing. I came from an organization prior to Cvent that was kind of fun and cool and we all dressed up and lots of decor, but there was no run of show. Like it didn't go to that level of insanity, but it's special and it makes people feel like they're a part of a really great work environment, and certainly is one of our like biggest recruitment and both retention efforts because it feels fun to be part of an environment that brings that type of energy to your workplace.
I was just going to say that. I was like, I hate to say it, but like, we're not going to just skim the surface on this experience, particularly with our employees, because we know how important getting together is. And so it is a go big or go home kind of effort.
Yeah. From the senior management level, like lens, like arguably, and this is nothing against external events or our partners or customers, like those are equally important, but at companies, I mean, your biggest asset is your employees. So you want to make sure that they're happy, and part of the engagement experience that you leverage at your events program or with your HR teams like is so important. And sometimes it feels like you don't have enough resources to do all the things that you need or want to do. I feel like that's sometimes where we have so many great ideas for internal events and we're engaging our employees as much as we can, but there's always new ideas and always new ways to do it. But I think that's it's one of our like core missions within our company is like the DNA of its people. And in order to keep good people, you need to have great experiences. And that, for us is super important on the events team.
I kind of want to put this out to our listeners, and there's no response or answer to this, but I would be interested to hear what other organizations are doing from the lens of the meetings and events team. And I'm also curious what your onboarding or return to office experience has been like for you and your team, just from a comparative lens. I'm curious, what it feels like to be the onboarders or the people working this return to office experience at another organization. Because I do genuinely feel like, we got our team together a little earlier before the official return to office and kind of got our bearings in terms of where are we sitting again? What does our pod look like? Like kind of understanding what the physical space and return to office looks like. But then beyond that, we've really been executing and implementing off of this really fantastic strategy. But I am taking a second to sort of take hindsight into consideration and say, how have I returned to office for our team? Thinking about best practices for a meetings and events team, right? You're so quickly returning and executing and implementing, but also, is there a moment to genuflect and say, how have we returned? And are there best practices that we can share across the industry that maybe support, that experience for these particular teams? Same for HR too, right? HR operations, these people have been very much a part of the return to office experience and perhaps maybe never really left. And so I'd be curious to hear what those perspectives are.
We need to then plan, or someone else in the company needs to plan a success event for us successfully returning, where we just us and HR and operations have a party on our own.
A return of the favor of sorts.
One other thing to think about is the ripple effects of all these like smaller things across, whether it's food related or it's like buying office supplies for remote people, whatever the engagement point is, or gift cards for your remote employees, and having virtual experiences that aren't virtual happy hours because nobody wants to do those damn things anymore. They just want to engage with their people. But that ripple effect of money going back into programs, I think, is really impactful for the events industry, but also the fringe industry, right? Like the delivery people, the shipping, the gift cards, the everything that goes into events, maybe on the peripheral, but has to do with these engagement experiences that are very much part of the events industry, but in the internal space. And I feel like, I'm sure the supply chain and all of that like is feeling it return, but it's also good for the economy to like bring these back to the table. I think one other thing I was going to mention just from a remote lens is one of the things that I think we did really well is share some tips and tricks with people returning to office, just like a reminder to remember that the culture is now shifted, right? It's now more on the hybrid side or more on the remote side than maybe in the office, and some other companies may have shut down offices and maybe just gone to HQ, but their remote population is X, or maybe they went fully remote. And how do you engage people with those meetings? And what is it, more travel to meet in areas for a sales kickoff, or is it trainings twice a year? And that literally is shifting everybody's internal events program. I mean, that could be a separate episode all on its own. Like, how did the work culture of hybrid versus remote versus in-person return affect your total events program internally? Like, I mean, don't even get me started. Like, looking at like the numbers itself, you're like, well, shoot, we have to think about our HQ in week differently. Paulina and I were just on a meeting about this. Like, our numbers aren't now 1,000 at HQ. Those numbers are different. So now we have to look at sourcing venues differently, and we have to look at things like that. But back to my original point, like, we sent some remote reminders, and it's stuff like, hey, remember to, like, if you're in a meeting room, remember to put the camera on you. Remember to mute yourself if you're not talking in the room. Remember to book a room. If you're a remote person, book a room for the people that are in person. And just like little reminders like that you're kind of like, wow, they're so small. But when you look at the full list, it actually like does help. Or when Paulina and Alyssa are having a beer at the keg or a coffee at the cold brew station, whatever it is, are you guys reminding me that you talked about a future podcast? Those water cooler conversations that maybe don't translate to the remote people, and just reminding people that are back in person that, hey, we have a very hybrid culture here, remote and in person. Like, don't forget about us. And then remote people also being aggressive about being like, hey, what happened today? And just remembering to be inclusive when it comes to remote versus in person and those types of engagements.
Meetings are also so integrated into event strategy, right? Like, if we just take just us meeting in a call room, like, that has its whole own agenda, run of show, like rules of engagement, how we should and should not interact with one another. So if we just look at this very, very small micro thing, so much has changed about how we do things, but we learned a lot through that pandemic that we can apply to this kind of going back to the office.
I think, okay, this is going to be really nerdy. We take our events pretty seriously. Obviously, we work for an events company, but we tier out, and we do like levels of events. We do process for every type of event. One thing that was a little eye-opening in the regional office council, like return to office committees, was we started to classify our employees differently, right? We had like 5 different groups of employees. So what I would recommend to listeners is, if you're not already doing this, and maybe you've been returned since last year and you're like, this is old news. Maybe you're returning soon. I don't know, wherever you are in your stage of returning, if you're returning at all, is to just take a snapshot of your employee landscape and look at the different tiers of things that you do for them. So for example, group 1 would be people in an office at HQ. Group 2 could be regional offices. Group 3 could be remote people that are in clusters, or we started calling them like
high density areas, like lots of Cventers in one area. Yeah.
Little pods or pockets at these major cities where they have 20 or more employees, and looking at those internal events budgets, like, okay, well, they have 30 people in Denver, for example, where I am, there's 30 of us. Do we get our own separate budget to do engagement events? The answer is yes. And so what does that mean for your events program? So the two pieces of feedback or tips for listeners, I would be, one, sync with your HR team on what your employee groups are. And then two, survey them. If you don't already have a strategy for them internally, survey them of what they want. Because like, I know the groups around me or in some of the other like California areas, they want to get together, but they don't want to come into an office. They want to be remote. They chose that life, and they want to maybe come back to HQ once a year and, have an occasional dinner with their, people in their area. And that's it. And that's fine. And that's group 3. And then group 4 and 5 can be different types of remote employees. But I would say, like, for you as a planner, meet with your HR, survey your employee types, and like then segment that off as, shoot, how does this impact my events programs?
We started this program as a pilot program. And I think that's a key term that we can't lose sight of. What we're doing right now may be significantly different in 2023. In the first half of 2023, it might be significantly different in the second half of 2023. I think what was something that was really a evolutionary kind of experience for our team is the added workload, the compounded roadmap, and all of it happening with really short prep time. And so I think just looking back on these past 6 weeks, if there's an opportunity for you to get ahead of it or start to imagine what an evolved version 2 of return to office might look like, I'm already thinking, okay, we've been back, whatever it is, 6 days a month or 2 days a week. What does that look like in 2023? Is this pilot program going to exist? And of course, that strategy is communicated outwardly, but we kind of need to be on our toes here and thinking about, okay, well, if it's 3 days a week, what does that mean for the events team? Does that mean more in-person events for the employees? And just thinking about the resourcing and bandwidth exercises that may need to take place now, because it is budget season. So all things just really timely and just being open to an evolved plan in, the quarters coming ahead.
Well, listeners, we hope that you enjoyed our chat today. We went and touched on a lot of different topics. I hope you found some inspiration, are thinking about your events programs a little differently, both internally and externally in some cases, depending on your events program. But as always, we do want to know what's going on with you. Send us a LinkedIn message, DM us on Instagram, or of course, drop us a note on greatevents@cvent.com, and we'll maybe feature you on an upcoming episode. I'm Rachel, and thanks for tuning in to Great Events Podcast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Great Events, a podcast by Cvent. If you want more resources on how to make your events great, go to community.cvent.com. That's community.cvent.com. Or if you've got a question for us or just want to say hi, email us at greatevents@cvent.com.